I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two the moment my husband laughed and said, "Oh, she's just here." It happened at a housewarming gala, one of those meticulously staged corporate events meant to impress investors and intimidate outsiders. Polished marble floors, glass walls towering over the city, wine that cost more than the dress I was wearing. The kind of place where people smiled with their teeth but measured each other with their eyes. My husband Marcus stood at the center of it all, radiant, confident, freshly promoted. 2 weeks earlier, he'd landed a director role at a company that had just relocated its regional headquarters to our city. This night was his victory lap, his proof that he'd finally made it. I watched him from across the room as he performed, laughing a second too loudly, touching his boss's arm during conversation, nodding with exaggerated interest at jokes that didn't deserve it. He looked like someone auditioning for a version of himself he desperately wanted the world to believe in. Then it happened. A real estate investor with a Rolex tan gestured toward me and asked Marcus, "So, is that your wife?" Marcus laughed, not politely, not awkwardly. He laughed like the question itself was amusing. "Oh," he said casually, waving a hand in my direction. "She's just here." Just here. Like decor, like a coat rack, like background noise to his carefully curated ascent. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I set my wine glass down, nodded faintly, as if heading to the restroom, and walked straight out through the sliding glass doors into the night air. By the time I reached my car, my hands were steady. I made one phone call. "Tom," I said, when my attorney answered, his voice thick with sleep, "It's time." A pause. Time for what? Cancel the acquisition. Invoke the conflict of interest clause. Silence stretched. Then, "You're serious." Section 14B. Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear the recalculation happening in his head. "Maximum impact?" he finally asked. "Yes," I said. "They need to understand immediately." What no one inside that glittering building knew, not Marcus, not his boss, not a single investor swirling expensive wine, was that the company he'd just joined had spent 6 months chasing what they believed was their crown jewel acquisition, a software platform. A platform I built, alone, 10 years ago. And in less than 24 hours, everything Marcus thought he'd earned was about to collapse, because he forgot who funded his entire life from the very beginning. Before that night, before the glass walls, the laughter, the word "just" slicing through 8 years of marriage, I was simply Elena, 34 years old, quiet by nature, methodical, the kind of woman people underestimated because I didn't dominate rooms or talk over others. Marcus and I met in our mid-20s. He was brilliant in a visible way, charismatic, ambitious, endlessly articulate about his plans. I was brilliant in a way that didn't photograph well. I built things slowly, silently. I preferred progress over applause. We fell in love the ordinary way. Late-night conversations, shared takeout on the floor of a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, dreams spoken softly because neither of us could yet afford to say them out loud. Marcus talked about climbing the corporate ladder, about leadership, about prestige. I talked less, but when I did, it was about systems, about efficiency, about solving problems most people didn't even realize existed. Back then, I worked relentlessly. 4 hours of sleep on a good night, one battered laptop with a cracked hinge, a whiteboard so covered in arrows and diagrams, it looked like the inside of my mind had spilled out. I wasn't chasing fame or investors. I was building something that worked. Marcus was across the country, finishing his second graduate degree. We survived on calls, texts, and the promise that all of this sacrifice would mean something someday. And it did. The platform I built wasn't flashy. No trendy name, no Silicon Valley buzzwords. But it was brutally efficient, able to optimize logistics routing based on real-world variables most systems ignored. Fuel consumption by hour, cargo weight distribution, driver fatigue, regional traffic patterns, even weather forecasts. It allowed mid-sized logistics firms to operate with near enterprise-level efficiency. When the first licensing deal closed, I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't announce anything. I just paid off Marcus's student loans. He never asked how. When the second deal finalized, I quietly covered the down payment on our house. Still, no questions. The third deal paid for his MBA tuition in full. No loans, no debt. Marcus posted a champagne selfie that day. "Debt-free life," the caption read, decorated with sparkles and emojis. I sat across from him at brunch, watching him smile behind oversized designer sunglasses, feeling proud and strangely invisible at the same time. I didn't mind then, truly. I wanted him to succeed. I supported his ambition because I loved him. I believed marriage meant lifting each other up, even if one of us did it quietly from behind the scenes. But over time, something shifted. At networking events, Marcus began telling people he'd worked multiple jobs to pay for grad school, that he'd built everything himself through sheer grit. I noticed how I disappeared from his stories, not deliberately erased, but quietly edited out. I became my wife, then she works in tech, then eventually nothing at all. I was still paying attention, still building, still maintaining the licensing agreements through my LLC, Apex Holdings, structured deliberately to protect my intellectual property and maintain control. Buried deep in those agreements was a clause I'd written during a paranoid 3 a.m. coding session. Section 14B, a safeguard. If anyone directly connected to me, spouse included, became affiliated with an acquiring company, the deal would be void. I never imagined I'd need it. Marcus never asked where the money came from. Never asked what I was working on. Eventually, he stopped asking about my day altogether. And somewhere along the way, he decided I was just there. The change didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in quietly, through small dismissals, missed questions, and conversations that slowly stopped including me. Marcus began coming home later. Not suspicious late. Just late enough to signal that his life was accelerating in a direction I wasn't fully invited into. His phone was always face down on the counter, his calendar filled with strategy syncs and leadership touchpoints. He spoke in acronyms I was expected to understand, but never asked to. When I tried to ask about his work, he'd summarize it in glossy phrases. Operational synergy, stakeholder alignment, executive velocity, nothing concrete. I noticed how he'd started correcting me in public, subtle, almost polite. If I explained something technical at a dinner party, he'd rephrase it moments later in simpler terms, as if translating for an audience he assumed couldn't follow me. At first, I told myself I was being sensitive. Then came his family. His mother started making comments, lightly at first. "So, Elena, are you still doing that little coding thing?" she asked one Sunday over brunch, stirring her coffee like the question was harmless. Marcus laughed before I could answer. "She's always tinkering with something." Tinkering. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a hobby. I watched how his sister's eyes flicked toward him when he spoke, how approval flowed only in one direction. Marcus was the success story now, the one climbing, the one worth investing in emotionally. I became the background support character, the steady wife who didn't demand attention. And I let it happen, because I thought love meant patience. Because I believed consistency would matter more than recognition in the long run. The first, Marcus came home buzzing with excitement. He'd just accepted a director role at a rapidly expanding firm, one making aggressive moves in logistics technology. He talked about growth curves and internal trust, about how leadership saw him as a bridge between strategy and execution. I listened carefully, very carefully, because too familiar. I asked one question, just one. What platform are they integrating for dispatch optimization? He shrugged. Some legacy adjacent system they're acquiring. Honestly, the architecture reminds me of the stuff you used to play with years ago. Years ago. As if the work had ended. as if the system hadn't evolved, scaled, and quietly funded our entire life. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Still, I said nothing. I didn't accuse. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain. I wanted to see how far this would go. Then came the housewarming invitation. A black and gold digital card. Formal attire requested. Investors attending. Marcus insisted I come. Said it would look strange if I didn't. I noticed the phrasing, not, I want you there, just optics. By then, the distance between us felt structural, not emotional. Like load-bearing beams had been removed, and we were both pretending the ceiling wouldn't collapse. At the party, I saw how he touched his boss's arm, how he laughed too loudly, how he leaned away from me physically when speaking to others. And when he said I was just here, something inside me clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Because it wasn't just disrespect, it was erasure. And erasure, I realized, was exactly why Section 14B existed. I didn't leave the party angry. I left certain. The night air outside the venue felt sharper than it should have. Cold enough to clear my head, quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat. I sat in my car for a full minute before turning the key, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. No shaking, no tears, just an overwhelming stillness, the kind that comes right before something irreversible. When Tom answered my call, his voice was groggy, confused by the late hour. "Tom," I said evenly, "it's time." There was a pause. "Time for what, Elena?" "Invoke the conflict of interest provision. Cancel the acquisition." Silence. Then a sharper intake of breath. "You're serious." Section 14B. That did it. I could hear papers shifting, the sound of him sitting upright, fully awake now. "They started working there 2 weeks ago." "I know." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you want this handled diplomatically, or do you want maximum impact?" I stared through the windshield at the glass building behind me, glowing like a monument to arrogance. Inside, Marcus was probably laughing again, already forgetting I existed. "Maximum impact," I said, immediately. "Understood," Tom replied, voice now all business. "I'll draft the notice tonight." When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. What no one at that party understood, not Marcus, not his executives, not the investors posturing with their wine, was how fragile their entire future had become. The company Marcus had just joined had spent 6 months negotiating what they believed was their crown jewel, a logistics optimization platform that would automate dispatch operations, eliminate waste, forecast fuel costs down to the hour, and overhaul their entire back-end infrastructure. They'd built investor decks around it, hired integration teams, anchored quarterly projections to its success. That platform was mine. I built it a decade earlier in a cramped apartment while Marcus was across the country finishing grad school. No team, no funding, no applause. Just a cracked laptop, sleepless nights, and an obsession with making something brutally efficient. And I'd made a deliberate choice back then to license the software, not sell it. To retain ownership through my LLC, Apex Holdings, designed specifically to shield my identity and protect control. Buried deep within the licensing agreement was Section 14B. If anyone directly connected to me, employee, advisor, family member, or spouse, became affiliated with an acquiring company, the agreement would become void immediately. Insurance. That's all it was supposed to be. I never imagined I'd need it. The next morning, Tom sent the notice. Immediate breach of Section 14B due to undisclosed spousal employment creating a direct conflict of interest. Acquisition frozen, effective immediately. All implementation and integration activities must cease pending legal review. He copied their entire legal department, their CEO, COO, board liaison. It wasn't a request. It was a detonation. While Marcus was probably rehearsing talking points for Monday's leadership sync, I spent the day calmly assembling documentation, original license terms, amendments, renewal clauses, email trails with timestamps, profit and loss statements, proof of ownership. Marcus had never seen any of it. He'd been too busy becoming someone else. That evening, he came home, glowing. His shoes, hit the hardwood with excited rhythm as he launched into conversation before even removing his coat. "You wouldn't believe how fast things are moving," he said, practically vibrating. "They've already got me leading the rollout schedule. People keep saying I have this natural authority in meetings." I stirred risotto at the stove, mushroom, his favorite, listening. "They're calling it Project Summit," he continued. "Terrible name, but the projections, insane. The CTO said the platform could cut operational costs by 42% in a year." I nodded. "Smart move." He smiled, missing the edge beneath my words. "One of the senior developers mentioned the core architecture feels familiar," he added casually. "Like legacy routing systems from a decade ago. Kind of funny, right? Small world." "Incredibly small world," I replied. He had no idea that earlier that same day, my legal team had sent a cease and desist to their implementation vendor. I could have told him everything right then, but why? He hadn't asked in 8 years, and some truths only land when they arrive without warning. The silence between us that night was heavy, but one-sided. Marcus talked through dinner as if nothing in the world had shifted, describing meetings, acronyms, internal politics. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed momentum alone could carry him anywhere. I nodded at the right moments, asked the occasional neutral question, served the risotto onto warm plates. He never asked what I'd done that day, not once. That realization hurt more than the insult at the party ever could. When he finally went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that were already clean, my reflection warped in the stainless steel sink. I wasn't angry. Anger would have meant I still expected something from him. I didn't sleep much. By Monday morning, the fallout had begun. Tom called mid-morning, his voice clipped. "They're in full crisis mode." I imagined it instantly. The glass conference room, burnt coffee, legal binders slamming onto tables. A company built on confidence, suddenly realizing its foundation was rotten. "They didn't see it coming," he continued. "Their legal team did a deep dive over the weekend. They're trapped." I closed my eyes briefly. And Marcus? That's where it gets interesting. The company needed a reason, a name, a human explanation for how a 6-month acquisition collapsed overnight. And Marcus was standing directly in the blast radius. He didn't see it coming. He was pulled into conference room A, the one with floor-to-ceiling glass, the one everyone knows means something has gone terribly wrong. The CEO sat at the head, legal counsel with a red folder. His boss looking like he hadn't slept. They played the audio of Tom's cease and desist. When it ended, the CEO asked calmly, "What exactly does your wife do again?" Marcus laughed weakly. "She used to work on some tech stuff years ago, nothing major." "Did she ever mention owning the intellectual property behind the platform we've spent 6 months preparing to acquire?" His breath caught. I didn't know it was hers. Legal leaned forward. "Apex Holdings. That's registered to your spouse, correct?" "Yes, but she's not involved anymore. She hasn't worked on that in years." The COO's voice was colder. "You approved back-end alignment protocols with her legacy architecture last week." "I didn't know it was her code," Marcus said, louder than he meant to. Legal cut in sharply. "Your name appears on 6 internal memos referencing this implementation as legacy adjacent technology. That establishes reasonable knowledge." "I genuinely didn't know," he insisted. "She never told me." The CEO stood slowly. "You've been married how long?" 8 years. "And in 8 years, you never once asked where the money for your graduate degrees came from." Silence. That question echoed through him like a fault line opening. By the time he came home that night, he looked smaller. He hovered in the doorway, watching me like I might disappear if he blinked. I was in the kitchen, calmly pouring coffee from a French press, morning light filtering through the windows. "What did you do?" he asked, voice unsteady. I took a sip before answering. "You said I was just here," I replied evenly. "So I left." He looked around the room like the furniture might explain things. His gaze landed on the folder on the table, cream-colored, labeled in my handwriting. Asset transfers. I don't understand, he whispered. You never asked, I said. He opened it slowly, read the first page, then the second, then back to the first again. His hands began to shake. The house, the car, the investment accounts. My name, alone, under the trust's controlling entity. Legal restructuring dated 3 months prior, right when he'd started treating me like an accessory. You moved everything, he said faintly. Yes. You can't just... I can, I interrupted calmly. My name was on it, until it wasn't. He collapsed into the chair like the air had been knocked out of him. What happens now? He asked quietly. I looked at him. Really looked. That depends, I said, on whether you're finally ready to acknowledge whose work built the floor you're standing on. He had no answer. And for the first time in years, I didn't wait for one. The next 3 days felt like watching a controlled demolition from the inside of the building. Marcus's phone stopped lighting up the way it used to. No excited Slack pings, no calendar reminders chiming every 15 minutes. The confidence he'd worn like armor began to crack, replaced by a restless pacing that wore grooves into our hardwood floor. He tried to talk to me, really talk, for the first time in months. Legal's running a full compliance sweep, he said one evening, voice low. They're reviewing every message, every email. They told me not to contact you. I didn't respond immediately. I was folding laundry with deliberate care, smoothing out wrinkles that didn't matter. They think I influenced priorities, he continued, that I fast-tracked integration because of you. I looked up then. Did you? His mouth opened, closed. I talked about the platform, casually. Casually, I repeated. He rubbed his face. They're saying that counts as reasonable knowledge. Because it does, I said quietly. He flinched. Not at my tone, but at the finality of it. His company moved fast after that. By Monday morning, Marcus's calendar was wiped clean. Project invites revoked. Slack permissions quietly updated. His access to the Summit Integration Board vanished entirely, replaced by a red banner. Restricted. Legal review only. He sat at his desk at home, laptop open, staring at a screen that no longer belonged to him. They've put me on administrative leave, he said flatly. Indefinite. No anger, no drama, just shock. That afternoon, his mother called. I could hear her voice through the phone, sharp, controlled, disappointed in a way that felt practiced. Is it true, she asked him, that the software belonged to your wife and she destroyed the deal? I watched Marcus's shoulders tense. It's complicated. No, it isn't, she snapped. You're married. She paid for your MBA. I told you not to take advantage back then. His eyes flicked toward me across the room. What are you talking about? He asked her weakly. Please, she scoffed. You think I believed you worked 2 jobs and came out debt-free? I stopped asking because I assumed you'd found a partner who actually supported you. Silence. Well, she continued coldly, turns out you did, and you treated her like a prop. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone like it had burned him. Then came the friends. Group chats went quiet. Messages he sent sat unread. The last text anyone else had posted was a mirror selfie from the office elevator, making moves before the party. Now, nothing. LinkedIn shifted subtly. Someone untagged him from a conference photo. A former colleague posted about a leadership offsite Marcus hadn't been invited to. The industry noticed too. A comment appeared under one of his company's posts. Wild that a firm this size didn't properly vet acquisition risks. No names mentioned. None needed. Logistics is a small world. By Wednesday, Marcus barely spoke. He moved through the house like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome, careful not to touch anything that might remind him it was no longer his. And through all of it, I stayed calm. Not cold, just steady. That seemed to unnerve him more than anger ever could. Why didn't you tell me? He asked one night, standing in the doorway to the bedroom. I met his gaze. Why didn't you ask? He swallowed. I didn't think it mattered. And that, I said softly, is exactly the problem. The escalation wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was systematic. Reputations eroded. Access vanished. Support networks dissolved. Marcus wasn't being punished. He was being removed. And for the first time since we'd met, he was finally seeing the cost of treating someone like background noise while standing on their work. Thursday night was the quietest our house had ever been. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own thoughts too clearly. Marcus sat on the edge of the couch, phone in his hands, screen dark. He hadn't turned it on in minutes, just held it, like muscle memory hadn't caught up with reality yet. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, not intruding, not retreating, just present. For 8 years, I'd been the steady one, the one who absorbed pressure so he could shine. And now that the pressure had shifted back onto him, he didn't know how to carry it. "I don't exist there anymore," he said suddenly, voice hoarse. "It's like I was erased." I leaned against the counter. "That's how erasure works." He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot, searching for something. Sympathy, forgiveness, a way back to the version of me who would soften the truth. Instead, I stayed honest. "They didn't destroy you," I continued quietly. "They just stopped protecting you." His jaw tightened. "You wanted this." I shook my head slowly. "No, I wanted respect. This is what happened when you decided I didn't matter." He looked away. That night he slept on the couch, not because I told him to, but because the bedroom felt like a place he no longer had permission to occupy. I lay awake listening to the house settle, every creak amplified by memory. This space, our space, had been paid for with nights I'd spent hunched over code while he talked about career trajectories and optics. I'd loved him through it, believed in him through it, and somewhere along the way, he'd started believing the success was his alone. The next morning, the email arrived. Compliance inquiry. Access restrictions notice. Marcus stared at the subject line for a long time before opening it. I watched his face as he read, how the color drained, how his shoulders slumped with the weight of inevitability. "They're reviewing everything," he whispered. "They think I downplayed the conflict, that I misrepresented risk." "Did you?" I asked gently. He didn't answer, because the truth was finally unavoidable. He had talked. He had dismissed. He had reassured people casually, because it was easier to minimize me than confront the possibility that his success was built on my foundation. By midday, his badge access was officially revoked. No ceremony, no meeting, just an automated message and a disabled login. He went for a walk after that, left without saying where he was going. When he came back, hours later, his eyes were empty in a way I'd never seen before. "They're calling it a career pause," he said bitterly. "Like that makes it sound temporary." I nodded. Language is how people soften endings. That evening, his sister called. She didn't yell, didn't accuse. She just said, "I always wondered why you never talked about what Elena did." Marcus closed his eyes. "You let everyone believe she was nothing," she continued quietly. "Even us." When the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time. Then, finally, his voice broke. "I didn't think you'd ever leave," he said. "I thought you'd always be there." The honesty in that admission hurt more than any insult, because he was right. I had always been there, until I realized being there wasn't the same as being seen. That was the lowest point. Not the legal collapse, not the professional ruin, not the public fallout. It was the moment I understood that the man I loved had mistaken my loyalty for invisibility. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic confrontation, no slammed doors, no raised voices, just clarity, slow, heavy, undeniable. Friday morning, Marcus dressed like he still had somewhere important to be. Button shirt, pressed slacks, neutral tie. Muscle memory again. He stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting details that no longer mattered. I watched from the doorway. "You don't have to do that," I said gently. He froze. "Do what?" "Pretend." His hands dropped to his sides. That was the moment something in him finally cracked. Not outwardly, but inwardly. The performance had nowhere left to go. Later that morning, he had his final meeting. HR, legal. His manager. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. When he came home, he didn't speak right away. He set his keys on the counter with care, like he was afraid of making noise. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once talked over me about operational synergy and stakeholder optics. They're placing me on indefinite administrative leave, he said quietly, pending final audit results. I nodded. I expected that. They said my credibility is compromised. I didn't correct him, because credibility isn't something that disappears overnight. It erodes every time you minimize the wrong person. He swallowed hard. They asked if I knowingly influenced internal priorities while aware of your ownership. And, I asked. He closed his eyes. I said I didn't know, not fully. That's not the same as no, I said softly. He opened his eyes then, really looked at me. I built my entire identity on being the smartest person in the room, he said. And I never noticed you were building the room itself. That was it. The turning point wasn't power shifting back to me. I'd always had it. It was him finally seeing it. Not as a threat, not as an inconvenience, but as reality. I don't know who I am without the career, he admitted. Without the story I told people. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Then maybe this is the first honest chapter you've had in a while. He laughed weakly. You sound like HR. No, I said calmly. I sound like someone who stopped lying to herself. That afternoon, I handed him another folder. Not legal documents this time. A timeline. Every licensing deal, every payment, every moment my work had quietly funded his life. Not to shame him, but to ground him. He read it slowly, carefully. I never asked, he whispered. No, I agreed. You never did. That night, he packed a bag. Not because I told him to leave, but because he finally understood that staying required accountability he wasn't ready to face. I'm going to my sister's, he said at the door, just for a while. I nodded. Take the time you need. He hesitated. Are we done? I met his eyes. We're honest now. That's the difference. And for the first time since this began, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not relief, resolve. Because the turning point wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my name from the silence I'd been living in for years. The collapse didn't announce itself with headlines. It unfolded quietly, professionally, exactly the way companies erase people when they don't want to admit fault. By Monday, Marcus's name had vanished from internal systems. His email returned a polite, automated response. His calendar was empty in a way that felt deliberate. Surgical. No farewell note. No thank you for your contributions. Just absence. The company issued a carefully worded update to investors. Strategic realignment following unforeseen contractual complexities. Translation. Someone failed and we are deciding how publicly. Legal teams kept working behind the scenes. Compliance reviews expanded. Every memo Marcus had touched was re-examined. Every Slack message recontextualized. The casual assurances he'd offered, meant to keep momentum, now read like negligence. Not malicious. Worse. Careless. The board didn't need a villain. They needed distance. And Marcus was the most efficient variable to remove. His manager stopped answering his texts entirely. HR sent a single follow-up email confirming continued leave status and reminding him not to represent the company in any capacity. That was it. 8 years of ambition reduced to a signature block that no longer included him. Meanwhile, the industry adjusted. A few logistics forums lit up with speculation. Nothing explicit, just knowing comments. Carefully vague posts about due diligence failures and respecting IP ownership. One developer tweeted, "Funny how the quiet builders end up holding the detonator." It gathered thousands of likes. Marcus didn't show me. I saw it on my own. He called once from his sister's place. "I don't think I'm going back," he said quietly. "Back where?" I asked. Anywhere that version of me existed. I let the silence stretch. "I'm not calling to ask you to fix this," he added quickly. "I know you can't. I know you won't." "I didn't break it," I said. "I just stopped holding it together." He exhaled shakily. I used to think power was being visible, being loud, being recognized. And now, I asked? Now I know it's being necessary. That admission didn't change the outcome. The legal process moved forward efficiently. Divorce filings were clean. No drama, no public disputes. The assets were already clearly defined, because I'd planned carefully long before things reached this point. Marcus didn't fight it. That surprised me. But then I realized, fighting would have required him to argue against the truth. His family didn't rally around him the way he'd expected. His mother called me once, not to apologize exactly, but to acknowledge. "You supported him more than he ever admitted," she said stiffly. I should have said something sooner. "You could have," I replied evenly. She didn't disagree. Marcus's friends drifted, not out of cruelty, but convenience. Proximity shifted, invitations stopped. Careers continued. That's how fallout works. It doesn't explode outward. It collapses inward. The company moved on. New priorities, new platforms, a quiet retreat from the acquisition they'd once celebrated. And me? I didn't celebrate. I returned to my work. The licensing agreements remained intact, revenue steady, predictable, quiet. Exactly how I'd always built things. One afternoon, weeks later, I walked past the same glass building where the party had taken place. I didn't go inside. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. Because the power I reclaimed wasn't about being seen. It was about no longer being erased. And Marcus finally understood something the hard way. Background noise can still own the room. The house felt different once Marcus was gone. Not emptier. Clearer. Mornings became quieter in a way that didn't ache. I woke without bracing myself for dismissal, for being talked over, for shrinking to make someone else feel important. I made coffee slowly. I worked when I wanted. I stopped explaining myself to people who never intended to listen. The divorce moved forward without spectacle. No courtroom drama, no shouting matches. Just signatures, timelines, and a clean severing of a life that had been sustained by silence for too long. Marcus stayed with his sister. We spoke rarely. When we did, the conversations were brief and honest, stripped of performance. He wasn't cruel anymore, but he wasn't my responsibility either. And that distinction mattered. I didn't rebuild myself. I uncovered myself. The woman who'd coded through exhaustion, who'd planned for contingencies no one else imagined, who'd written Section 14B at 3 a.m. because something deep inside her understood risk. That woman had always been here. She'd just been quiet. The world has a habit of mistaking quiet for weak. It confuses restraint with absence, support with submission, love with erasure. I learned, too late but not irreparably, that loyalty without visibility becomes invisibility, that partnership without curiosity becomes entitlement, and that people who benefit from your work will often convince themselves they earned it alone. Until the foundation moves. I didn't ruin Marcus's life. I stopped cushioning it. The software continues to run. The licensing revenue still arrives on schedule. The systems I built do what they were always designed to do: optimize, correct inefficiencies, expose waste, including emotional waste. I don't attend parties anymore unless I'm invited as myself, not as an accessory, not as proof of stability, not as background decor for someone else's ambition. And if there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this: never make yourself small to be loved. Never stay silent to be kept. And never forget, being quiet doesn't mean you aren't powerful. Sometimes it just means you're building something that will outlast the noise.